Bell from the church tower is chiming, and I'm going to chirp up and chime just one more time. Now, I want to see whether you can identify some of these pictures on here, because see, some of these are the most horrific acts that have took place in the last century. Anybody recognise this one here? We've got some children in striped pyjamas. You may have read the book, The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas. That might give you a big clue. On the other side, some barbed wire fence there. Anybody know what horrific act was going on there in that picture there? Was, of course, the Holocaust, wasn't it? Where 6 million Jews died, lots of gypsies as well, and lots of members of different communities were killed by Hitler. A horrific act, I'm sure you'll agree. What's going on here? See a student stood in front of some tanks, a row of tanks. Anybody spot what's going on there? Anybody remember that? It was the 1980s. It was in China. It was, of course, the Tiananmen Square massacre, where the Chinese government quashed any rebellion from the young people of the day, and they've been a strong power, dictatorial power ever since. And it was horrific. What about this act here? Probably less well known, but more recent. Just 3 years ago, a bomb went off in a petrol station, killing 10 people in Donegal. Again, a terrible, evil act. And another shocking one that sent shockwaves throughout the world. And it was when the World Trade Center was destroyed, killing nearly 3,000 people that day, as planes flew into the building and down they came. Horrific acts of violence and evil that we all recognise. We all recognise evil in the world, and it brings up one of these questions, and I get asked this question a lot, and it's the biggest objection to God being real. And people say to me, look, Paul, if God was real, why does he allow all the suffering? Why does he allow all this suffering in the world? Now, before I answer that question, can I just say something? The very presence of evil proves there's a God. The fact that we can identify evil proves there's a God. If you can recognise that these acts are bad, then you can understand the difference between good and evil. Now, where does that idea, that sense of what we call morality come from? The ability to distinguish between good and evil. It comes, of course, from God, doesn't it? It's not something tangible. It's not something we can hold. We can't hold morality. We can't conjure it up. We can't make it. It's just something that is. It's an invisible quality that we have. Where does it come from? Because if we're just a collection of organisms and matter put together that's evolved, how can science explain where things like morality and love come from? They come from God, don't they? So that proves God is real, the fact that we can distinguish between good and evil straight away. So let me say that off the bat. But let's get to this main issue of why does God allow suffering? Why does he allow all the hurt and pain that we see in the world? If God is a God of love, he could just stop it. He could just stop it straight away. So why doesn't he intervene? Well, do you know, he doesn't intervene because he allows free will to take its course. If you think about it, if God stopped all the suffering in the world right now, all of it, you and I would have to disappear, wouldn't we? Because we've caused suffering. And we do cause suffering. So if God wants the world to be perfect with no suffering whatsoever, then he would have to get rid of us, wouldn't we? And that's exactly what happened. Just heard the bell chiming at the church there. And if the next time the bell chimes, at 11:15, if God got rid of all the suffering in the whole world at 11:15, in just 7 minutes' time, we'd vanish into a puff of smoke. Vanish into thin air, wouldn't we? So you can see why God doesn't get rid of suffering. And do you know what? I'll be honest with you. I am glad that God allows suffering. Whoa, a few heads have turned there. What do you mean, good? Glad that God allows suffering? You can't say that. Shall I tell you why I'm glad? Because if he did not allow suffering, he would not have allowed his son to die in a cruel, agonizing, painful, suffering way on the cross. And I'm glad he allowed that, because it's through Jesus' suffering and death that I can be forgiven. See, God suffered like no man has ever suffered when he allowed himself to be nailed on the cross. He paid the terrible punishment that we deserve, the innocent dying for us, the guilty. So I'm glad that God allowed suffering, because if he didn't, he wouldn't have allowed his son to suffer. But he allowed his son to suffer so that you and I can be forgiven. And that is love. That is love. But you know, there's a message here, and that's that one day all suffering will go. All suffering will vanish. When Jesus comes again, he's going to recreate the world. There's going to be new heavens, a new earth, and everything's going to be perfect. With no more tears, no more crying, no more pain, no more suffering, no more death. That's what Revelation tells us. And you know, I want everybody here in Wigan today to be where I'm going to end up being, in heaven. And you don't get there by being good. You get there by coming to God. He's already made the way. He's already made the way to heaven, where there will be no more suffering. He's already paid for your sin. You don't need to pay for it. So don't end up in hell paying for your own sin when Jesus has already paid for it. Just come to him and say, Jesus, thank you for dying for me. Forgive me of my sin and help me to follow you. And if you say those words and you really mean them, then it'll be just like the thief on the cross at the side of Jesus, when Jesus said to him, today you will be with me in paradise. You will have eternity in your heart starting from today if you come to Jesus now. So please consider these things. And if you want to chat further, please do approach me and we'll chat about these things. Thank you for listening.